Let me tell you something that may hit a little too close to home. You've spent so much of your energy pouring love into people who barely knew how to hold it. You've texted first. You've made plans. You've forgiven too quickly. You've tried too hard, not because you're desperate, but because your heart is pure. Because when you love deeply. But let's be honest, how many times have you felt exhausted? Not because you're unlovable, but because you're giving the kind of love that others never learned how to return. Let me say this clearly. You deserve the same energy, the same effort, the same softness that you give so freely to others. Now, let's break this down into 3 truths you need to hold on to. There comes a moment in every person's life, especially those who have loved with everything they had, when they sit quietly with themselves and begin to question whether what they want in love is simply too much. Too big, too complicated. Maybe you've been there, maybe you're still there. You've watched yourself give, not halfway, not carefully measured, but wholeheartedly, texting first, initiating conversations, making plans, staying up late even when you're exhausted just to support someone who wouldn't do the same for you. You've found yourself compromising, shrinking your needs, silencing your instincts, because deep down you were afraid that being too much would scare someone away, and maybe it did. But here's what you didn't realize back then. They weren't scared by your love. They were scared by the responsibility that comes with being on the receiving end of something so pure. And that's not your burden to carry. Somewhere along the line, you were convinced that having standard, expecting effort, consistency, honesty, emotional maturity, meant you were being difficult. You were told, either directly or through subtle emotional neglect, that you were asking for too much, that real love is messy, and that if you wanted to be with someone, you had to settle for imperfection, meaning you had to tolerate disrespect, poor communication, or emotional distance. So you stayed, you rationalized, you accepted breadcrumbs and called it a meal. You convinced yourself that if you were just a little more understanding, more forgiving, more agreeable, that maybe they'd see your worth. But let's be clear, lowering your standards to maintain a connection does not create love. It creates an emotional performance, one where you audition every day to be chosen, to be loved, to be seen, and it's exhausting. At some point, the fatigue catches up to you. Your soul gets tired of begging to be valued. Your heart, no matter how strong, begins to ache under the weight of constantly trying to prove it deserves basic kindness. That's the turning point, the quiet, powerful moment when you stop blaming yourself for wanting more, and you start understanding that maybe what you want isn't too much. Maybe it's just not possible with the people you've chosen. Maybe the issue isn't your standards being too high, but the people around you consistently being unwilling or unable to meet them. And when that shift in awareness happens, everything changes. You begin to realize that your standards are not walls built out of bitterness. They are boundaries shaped by healing. They aren't meant to push people away, but to protect the peace you've fought so hard to reclaim. You understand that your standards are not selfish, they are sacred. They are the filter that separates those who are just curious about your light from those who are committed to protecting it. Because the truth is, when you love from a healed place, your standards don't become outrageous. They become non-negotiable. You no longer tolerate emotional ambiguity. You no longer romanticize potential. You no longer mistake chaos for chemistry. You start to seek people who don't need to be convinced to treat you well. People who recognize your value because they've done the work to see their own. You look for presence, not performance. You want someone who doesn't just promise effort, but practices it, and if that narrows the dating pool, good, because love isn't a numbers game, it's a standards game. You'd rather wait for someone who speaks your emotional language fluently than waste time translating your needs to someone who doesn't even try to understand them. And yes, there will be moments of loneliness. Moments where you question if you're being too harsh, too cold, too guarded. But guarding your peace doesn't make you cold. It makes you wise. It means you've learned from every time you handed your heart to someone who wasn't ready to hold it. It means you've made peace with solitude because you'd rather be alone in truth than together in emotional confusion. And no, it doesn't mean you've stopped believing in love. It means you believe in healthy love. Love that chooses you every day, love that doesn't run at the first sign of depth, love that's not afraid of difficult conversations or vulnerable silence, the kind of love you don't have to beg for, the kind of love that's safe, and when someone does come along who meets you at your standard, not beneath it, not slightly under it, but truly aligned with it, you'll feel the difference instantly. You won't have to question their intentions. You won't feel like you're performing, you'll feel seen, not studied, loved, not tolerated, safe, not silenced. And it will all make sense. Why you had to let certain people go, why you had to cry through nights of questioning your worth, why you had to grow into someone strong enough to choose herself over shallow love. It wasn't punishment, it was preparation. It was life making sure you'd never again mistake being chosen for being cherished. And in that moment, when love finally arrives in its real, grounded, soul-level form, you'll realize something. Your standards weren't the problem. They were the solution all along. They were your lifeline in a world that often teaches people to settle. They were your reminder that what you desire exists, but only if you're brave enough to not abandon yourself while waiting for it. So no, your standards are not too high. They are finally starting to match your worth, and anyone who says otherwise was never meant to stay. There is something deeply painful, and deeply familiar to so many of us, about trying to love someone who simply isn't ready to be loved. Not just unavailable in the practical sense, but emotionally closed off, disconnected, or too wrapped in their own internal battles to truly show up for anyone else. And yet we try. We try harder, we stay longer, we give more. Not because we're weak, but because we've mistaken emotional investment for emotional return. Somewhere along the way, we learn to confuse effort with worthiness, that if we just love someone well enough, purely enough, consistently enough, they will eventually realize our value and begin to love us the way we've been loving them all along. We convince ourselves that our patience will be rewarded, that our loyalty will pay off, that our sacrifices will someday be seen as proof that we were the right one all along. But love doesn't work that way. It never has. You don't earn real love by proving your value to someone who has already shown you they're not in a place to receive or reciprocate. And yet, when the love we give goes unacknowledged or unreturned, we tend to internalize it. We tell ourselves we're the problem. We wonder, maybe if I didn't express my feelings too soon, or maybe if I were a little less intense, a little more detached, they'd stay. But all of those thoughts come from the same false belief that your love must be proven to be accepted, that you must constantly show, demonstrate, convince. But here's the hard truth. If you're constantly having to prove your love, you are not in a relationship, you are in an audition. You are fighting to be seen in a role that someone else isn't even ready to cast. And worse, you're building emotional castles in the sand, hoping the foundation will hold just because your heart is in it. But love isn't sustained by one person doing all the emotional labor. You can't build something real with someone who is only emotionally available on their terms, who flinches every time you bring your real needs into the room, who only responds to you when it's convenient or when you start to pull away. That's not love, that's a loop, and the longer you stay in that loop, explaining your love, overextending yourself, justifying why you deserve a chance, the more you detach from your own worth. You start to believe that maybe being loved is something you have to earn instead of something you inherently deserve. You forget that your capacity to love deeply is not a weakness, it's a strength, but that strength requires discernment. Because not everyone is ready for the kind of love you offer. Some people, if we're being honest, prefer the chase to the connection. Some are drawn to your energy, your warmth, your stability, but they have no intention of matching it. They are tourists in your emotional landscape, admiring the view, but never staying long enough to build anything real. And yet, because you see potential, you keep trying. You tell yourself that if you hold on just a little longer, they'll evolve. That one day they'll wake up and see how deeply you've been there for them, and they'll finally offer back the love you've been giving without condition. But that day rarely comes, because someone who isn't ready to receive love won't suddenly transform because you tried harder. That's not how healing works. That's not how growth happens. It's not your job to love someone into becoming who they could be. You are not a project manager for someone's emotional readiness. You are not a fixer. You are not a placeholder until they find themselves. You are a human being, deserving of love that flows naturally toward you, not love that has to be chased down, squeezed out, or earned through emotional gymnastics. The love you give is not meant to be a test. It's meant to be a connection, a shared space where both people meet with open hearts and clear intentions. And if someone is unable to meet you there, the answer is not to fight harder for their love. The answer is to walk away and preserve your own. Because here's the truth. Trying to prove your love to someone who isn't ready to receive it doesn't convince them to love you. It convinces you that love must come through struggle. That love is earned through suffering, through pleasing, through overextending yourself. And once you start to believe that, you start to invite it in again and again. You start to attract emotionally unavailable people because they validate the role you've unconsciously accepted, the one who gives, waits, pleads, and hopes. And I want to tell you something that might stop you in your tracks. You don't need to prove your love to the right person. The right person will see it. The right person will value it without needing a demonstration. They'll understand it because they've done the inner work to understand themselves. They'll return it, not out of obligation, but out of desire. The love you deserve doesn't arrive through exhaustion. It arrives through alignment. It flows in both directions. It feels calm, not confusing. It is not something you have to fight for. It's something you both protect. And when you look back at all the people you tried to prove yourself to, you won't be angry. You'll feel compassion for them and for yourself. You'll understand that you were giving your love the only way you knew how, through effort, through persistence, through proving, but now you know better. Now you know that real love doesn't require proof, it requires presence. It requires mutuality. It requires two people, not just one. So let this be the moment you release the need to audition. Let this be the moment you walk away from the situations that have taught you to equate love with struggle. Let this be the moment you reclaim the kind of love that doesn't have to be earned by constantly showing how loyal, caring, or patient you can be. You don't have to beg to be chosen. You don't have to lower your standards just to stay connected. And you certainly don't have to keep trying to prove a heart that is already beating loudly with everything it has to give. Because your love, when given to the right person, will not be seen as too much. It will be met. It will be mirrored. It will be held. So stop pouring your love into hands that are not ready to hold it. Preserve that love, cherish it, and wait for the one who doesn't need convincing, because they'll already know exactly what they have when they find you. There comes a point, after the heartbreaks, the disappointment, the moments where you gave everything and received very little in return, when you finally turn inward and ask yourself, quietly and honestly, what am I really searching for in someone else that I haven't given myself? For most people, it's not just companionship, affection, or a shared life. It's validation, it's relief, it's safety. It's the feeling of being enough, being seen, being wanted without having to earn it. We grow up believing that love is something that comes from outside of us, that it's given by someone else, that it must be pursued, captured, held onto tightly. But the truth that we're rarely taught is that real, stable, lasting love starts within. Not in a superficial treat yourself kind of way, not in forced affirmations or cute quotes online, but in a real, grounded, and sometimes painful reckoning with how we've been showing up for ourselves, or not. You see, many people chase love because they're hoping it will finally fill a space inside that feels empty. They think, once someone chooses me, I'll feel secure. Once I'm loved the way I love, I'll feel whole. But no amount of external love will ever be enough to satisfy the parts of you that you've abandoned. That's why, even when we find someone who seems to care, the anxiety doesn't go away. We still overthink. We still cling. We still question, not because they're doing something wrong, but because we don't yet trust that we're enough on our own. And until you build that trust within yourself, love will always feel fragile. You'll always be waiting for the other shoe to drop. You'll always feel like you're one mistake away from losing everything. That's not love, that's emotional survival, and healing it starts by choosing to stop outsourcing your worth. The love you're searching for, the kind that makes you feel safe, chosen, valued, it doesn't start when someone finally sees you. It starts when you do, when you begin to listen to your own needs and honor them. When you stop betraying yourself just to keep the peace with others, when you say no to things that drain you and yes to things that nourish you without waiting for permission. Self-love is not a destination, it's a decision you make over and over again. It's choosing not to text someone who left you on read for days. It's unfollowing the person whose posts make you spiral with comparison and doubt. It's walking away from conversations where you have to explain your value instead of being met with respect. And no, it's not always easy. In fact, real self-love often feels uncomfortable at first, especially if you've spent years putting everyone else before you. You'll feel guilty for setting boundaries. You'll feel selfish for prioritizing your needs. You'll even feel lonely because you've disconnected from the familiar patterns, even the toxic ones, that once kept you company. But what grows in that discomfort is everything you've been searching for. You begin to realize that peace is not the absence of chaos, it's the presence of alignment. You start making decisions from self-respect, not desperation. You stop staying in places where your worth is questioned. You stop needing to be chosen by people who don't even value themselves, and as you grow into that space, as you return to yourself, you begin to change what you're attracted to, the patterns break, the cycles end. You no longer crave the emotionally unavailable person just because they trigger your sense of urgency. You stop romanticizing intensity and start craving consistency. You no longer chase closure from people who are never capable of giving it. Instead, you become the closure, you become the peace, you become the love you thought only someone else could give you, and from that place, when you are full, not empty, when you are whole, not waiting, you start to attract differently. You attract people who are also full, who are also whole, not because you need them to complete you, but because you've made enough room for connection instead of codependency, and the love that shows up then is real. It's stable, it's kind, it's not about filling a void, it's about expanding what's already healthy and strong inside of you. That's the paradox of it all. When you stop chasing love, it starts finding you. When you stop trying to be lovable and start loving yourself as you are, you become magnetic in a way that no effort, no performance, no people pleasing could ever achieve. The right people gravitate toward that kind of self-assurance, not because it's loud, but because it's real. You know who you are, you know what you deserve, and you're no longer willing to bargain with your dignity just to keep someone interested. The love you're looking for, the kind you write about, dream about, pray for, doesn't start the day someone else chooses you. It starts the day you do, the day you finally say, I am enough, even if no one else says it. The day you start living like your love is too sacred to be wasted on people who aren't ready to receive it. The day you stop negotiating your self-worth in conversations that leave you doubting your value. That's when things begin to shift. That's when you begin to glow from within. And suddenly, you realize that you're not alone anymore. Not because someone else showed up to complete you, but because you came home to yourself. And once you do that, the rest of the world has no choice but to meet you at the level you've set. Because the love you were always searching for was never lost. It was buried beneath the noise, the wounds, the striving, the proving. It was waiting for you to remember that the most powerful kind of love is the kind that starts with you and flows outward, not from lack, but from overflow. You deserve the love you keep trying to give others, but you have to believe that first, because when you do, you stop chasing love, and you start attracting it. So here's your challenge. From this moment on, promise yourself this: I will never give someone more love than I give myself. Because the most beautiful kind of love doesn't come when you chase it. It comes when you become it.